This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from an Expats Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode. Today we're going to talk about whether Russia is a cheap country for expats. I know Russia has always had a reputation for being very, very expensive, especially Moscow, but in recent years things have changed. And Marcus, what do you think? I know you lived in Russia before the ruble crisis. I kind of came just before, but most of the time that I lived in Russia was after the ruble crisis. So in terms of dollars or euros, it was always quite cheap when I was living there. But what about you? So you've seen it in both situations. But let's kind of focus more on what it's like today. But would you consider Russia a cheap country overall?
Overall, Russia is a cheap country for any Western expat who wants to go and spend a significant amount of time there. I mean, if you get down to services, mostly services and utilities and all those things, those are very cheap compared to dollars and euros. So that's basically what we're going to compare to. Europe and America.
Well, I would say almost what is more expensive in Russia? The only things that I can really think of are like clothes or some sort of high-end electronics. But other than that, almost everything is cheaper. Maybe some cars are a bit more expensive. But generally, almost everything is cheaper, from groceries, rent, maybe real estate generally is a bit more expensive if you compare like apples to apples, right? Like exact same size apartment in Moscow versus the exact same in even New York. I think Moscow might be more expensive, but renting that same apartment is very different. But all of the basic utilities, like you said, services are much, much cheaper. Restaurants,
gas,
much cheaper than in the US. Gas,
taxis,
gas is a bit cheaper,
anything like that.
Yeah. All of those things are much, much cheaper in Russia.
Well, I would divide it into two categories. I would divide it into things that are imported into Russia. So electronics, like you said, any food products, clothes, like any brand name things, anything imported into Russia will have a higher price tag. But
I think we should mention it's higher than the domestic alternative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's higher than it would be. I mean, if you want to buy nice Parmesan cheese, technically you can't in Russia, but you can find it. It's the same price as in the US. Of course, it's more expensive than in Italy, but I think a lot of the imported stuff is still not more expensive than it is in the West, if that makes sense.
It really depends on the demand, right?
Sure.
And really the type of item that it is, because they're different they're taxed differently based on the category. So. Right. Like electronics are noticeably more expensive, right? If you want to buy the newest iPhone, for example. Lots of my Russian friends or even foreigner like expats in Russia will consistently buy them abroad and bring them into Russia as a personal item. So. And we got around the things that we really wanted. We mentioned this in a different video that we would, on our trips to the U.S., we would just get those things that were cheaper. We'd get them in one or two suitcases and bring them to mostly clothes and some electronics and personal things. But as an example, a good example, things that are hard to import, things that are difficult to bring in a suitcase. My family and I wanted to go camping. We did a big camping trip every summer between Moscow and St. Petersburg. And Russians don't really use coolers like they do in the U.S. I wanted the biggest cooler that I could find for all the meats and everything to keep cold. And I bought it online. At the time, it was 5,000 something rubles. It was a good, $80 or $90 when you could go to Walmart in the US and get it for, I don't know, $50 or $40, maybe even
Right.
less. I mean, so there are categories of things that you're just going to spend more because they're not used.
Right.
Russians don't
Right.
use those types of products, and you can find them, but I had to really search, and then I ordered it online with delivery. But when we do you remember any specific things that you paid more for, and you're like, wow, this was quite a bit more than the U.S.
No, there really weren't. That's why I kind of made the statement that I did in the beginning of this video that generally everything is the same or cheaper than it is in America. Um, then if you
I would
combine
say
that with
except those very specific items, right? I wouldn't say very specific because to me a cooler is a
okay,
normal
okay, you
item.
know what? You know what? You're right. You're right. I think a lot of cultural items. I think if you wanted a nice tent, it would be twice the price in Russia
Mm-hmm.
for the same tent. Clothing, I think, is the best example, right? If you have a nice heavy jacket from North Face or something, that's not even made in America. It's just an American brand. It's obviously made in
Right.
China, but that same jacket will cost twice as much in Russia, maybe more. And a lot of the kind of outdoors things I noticed also were like that. Like, want nice boots in Russia. It was very hard
Mm-hmm.
to find nice boots. They had either like really nice boots or really crummy boots. It was very hard to find a lot
Right.
of mid-range things in Russia, and those sometimes if you can't find them, you have to go with the higher end versions. The quality's better that you're buying in Russia, but because it's an imported product, it's more. I
Let me
don't
give
know.
you another example. So I had a car in Russia. I had an Audi, and any of the parts were considerably more expensive.
Hmm.
Um,
Then in
and
Germany or then
I
in the United States? Because that's
both,
not a fair comparison. Okay.
both. They were. It was more expensive to like go do get an oil change because the oil
Sure.
itself was a little bit more expensive. Um, some of the basic parts were a little bit more expensive. Now I did opt for after for like off-brand parts when they asked me at the auto shop, do you want
Mm-hmm.
the OEME
The
product
official.
or do you
Right.
want the aftermarket this type? And I would
Right.
always say, what's the life? What's the life on the product? And he'd say, honestly, it's the same. Some OME parts you want
OEM.
to
Yeah.
get OEM, yeah. OEM parts you want to get. But yeah, they always gave me that option. Um, so every time I kind of had to upgrade something on my, or replace something on my car, I was like, I don't know the price of this. Now I'm gonna, spend more than and I was always comparing prices to the U.S.
Right.
Always.
Sure.
Um,
Everybody does.
so that's another thing. Uh, let's see what other.
I mean, would you agree with my overarching statement that if you break it down, almost all sort of buckets of goods are cheaper in Russia, goods and services?
Well,
That there are only certain,
um,
like, kind of off exceptions where something is considerably more expensive than it is in the United States.
in general, if you can find that same thing that's item that's made in Russia, so food is a good example. So you would go
Mm-hmm.
to the supermarket, and I would pick out a yogurt. If you're gonna go with Activia or Dannon or something like that, then which is not a Russian brand, it was more expensive than Chuda, the Russian brand, right?
Right.
So you can always, like if you're very budget conscious, you can always go with the Russian made
Sure.
brands, and they're very, very similar. Most of those, large, like the milk products, and I don't know, they don't have. That's the best example I can give right now, yogurt, but or jams or something like that, right? It seems silly to buy imported jams when Russia has, lots and lots of different kinds of berries
Right.
that they make jams from. So I kind of just switched to Russian-made products, and but then again, when I had to buy something that I couldn't find, like electronics or specific clothes or something, I would wait till I went to the U.S. or Europe, because those were noticeably, there was a price difference for sure.
Right. So you do agree with me overall that most things are cheaper in Russia, right? I think
Right.
that's what we want to show our viewers.
Right. I agree that most things are cheaper, especially, again, like you mentioned, services, mobile, like your mobile plan for
Telephone
the month.
service, yeah.
Yes, 500, 600 rubles. I think I paid a consistent 600 rubles. So depends on the exchange rate, but it was $8 to $10
Right.
for like 10 gigs and
Yep.
1,000 SMS messages, and then our internet we spent 500 to 600 rubles, and I think it was about 50 megabits, something like that.
Yeah.
So I
mean,
would
I had
spend
300 megabits for $10 or something in Moscow. So it's not even the speed difference thing. The internet was
right.
very fast and very cheap.
Gas was very cheap until the ruble started getting weak,
No,
and
so
then they
the
started.
the thing with gas is the gas is always priced in dollars. The price didn't
Right.
change. It
But if you compare it to the U.S., it's very, very similar. Depends on the state that you're buying, but
most states are cheaper in the U.S. Of course, like California or some of the more liberal states, you'll find that there are higher taxes there, and it's more expensive than Russia. But if you compare gas in Russia to Europe, it's a whole other world. It's like 4 or 5 times cheaper.
Right. I don't want to drive my car here in Europe.
Yeah.
But and then public transportation is super cheap. I bought like Metro Pass is like a day Metro Pass in Moscow, or let's say one ride is what, 40, 45 rubles.
Yeah.
Depends on how you buy it, but
Right.
it's less than $1, right? So if you're, I
Right.
don't know what it is in New York, but here, for
275.
example, it's probably 2.5 euros to not even that far.
Right.
So overall,
Yeah.
those services, the utilities, extremely cheap. Heating, and like all the utilities, garbage and everything, that would run you less than $100 with all your internet and phone. And,
Right.
So you can definitely pick and choose what products you're gonna buy, whether they're imported or local, and drive your overall costs way down.
Absolutely. So generally, we would say Russia is a very cheap country, especially if you're comparing it to Western Europe or the United States. So
If you
think
have
differently-
dollars or or euros, then you can have a very nice vacation or
Right.
extended stay in Russia.
I think the gold standard is having a salary denominated in euros or dollars and living in Russia. But
Yes.
if you have any different ideas, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think about the cost of doing things in Russia. We'll see you in the next video. This was Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from an Expats Russia. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have a question about Russia, let us know in the comments. We'll answer it in another video.